It all started on a quiet Thursday morning. The kind of morning where the air feels just right, the coffee brews perfectly, and the world seems like it might actually behave for once. I had just stepped outside with a hot mug in hand, ready to enjoy the porch I'd spent nearly every weekend for the past 2 months building with my own 2 hands. Cedarwood planks, hand-stained in a warm walnut finish, with vintage-style iron railings and a small swing bench tucked into the corner. It was more than a porch. It was a labor of love, a peaceful, personal retreat. Every detail, from the stone footings to the Edison bulb string lights overhead, was mine. My design. My work. My sanctuary. But that piece shattered when I saw it. Taped to my front door was a sheet of paper, printed in bold block letters that practically shouted at me in bureaucratic rage, "Notice of non-compliance." My first instinct was to laugh. Honestly, I thought it was some sort of prank. Maybe a neighbor with a bad sense of humor. But as I peeled the paper from the door, my amusement faded. This wasn't a joke. It was real, official HOA stationery, complete with letterhead and some ridiculous legal language. According to the letter, my porch was not in architectural harmony with the community's visual standards. They demanded that I either redesign it or face a daily fine of $250, effective in 7 days. 7 days. I read the notice 3 times in disbelief. My porch, something I built on my property with my materials, without cutting corners, and following city code, was suddenly a violation? It didn't make sense. Nothing about it did. At the bottom of the notice was a glossy printout of a 3D rendering showing what my porch should look like, according to them. It was laughable. Fake Mediterranean-style columns, stucco paint in a hideous beige tone, and a clay tile roof awning that looked more appropriate for a strip mall in Phoenix than a peaceful cul-de-sac in Colorado. My house is a craftsman-style build from the 1950s, who in their right mind would think it needed faux Spanish Revival features? I crumpled the notice in my hand and took a deep breath. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe I could just call the HOA and get it straightened out. I mean, we're neighbors, right? Wrong. I phoned the HOA office and asked to speak with someone about the violation. After 30 minutes of being transferred, put on hold, and talked down to like I'd dumped motor oil on my lawn, I finally reached a board member. His name was Gerald. He sounded like the kind of man who wore sweater vests unironically and printed his own business cards for social mixers. He didn't even try to be polite. "Mr. Langston," he said, his voice dripping with smugness, "we understand you may be upset, but the Oakbridge community is undergoing a rebranding phase. We're enforcing new standards that will enhance visual cohesion and property values." "You mean you decided you didn't like how my porch looked?" I shot back. "No one in my cul-de-sac has complained. My neighbors loved what I built." "I'm sorry," he said, clearly not sorry. "But we've already mailed out the redesign plans. You'll need to comply." He hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there in stunned silence. This wasn't about my porch. It was about control. Some wannabe design czar had appointed himself king of the neighborhood and decided that individuality was a threat. That my choice to build something unique, something personal, somehow disrupted his vision of harmony. And now I was supposed to tear it down and replace it with whatever uninspired cookie-cutter nonsense they dreamed up? I wasn't angry yet, not truly. I was still in shock. But that changed when I started talking to my neighbors. That afternoon, I walked the block and knocked on doors. Some people were kind enough to talk. Others, clearly rattled, just nodded nervously and closed their doors. It didn't take long to get the picture. The HOA had already been sending out similar notices for weeks. Front yard flower beds, patio furniture, even mailbox colors. Gerald and the board had been systematically enforcing this new, community aesthetic, through threats of fines and bureaucratic pressure. What really lit the fire in me was hearing about Mrs. Pennington, a sweet widow down the road who'd been forced to paint over her late husband's mural on their garage door. It had been there for a decade. A tribute to the garden they built together. Gerald said it clashed with the neighborhood palate. I realized then that this was personal. Not just for me, but for everyone around me. My porch had simply become the latest battlefield in a war for the soul of the neighborhood. And while others might have rolled over to avoid the hassle, I wasn't wired that way. They thought they could force me into some pre-approved architectural box. That I'd just nod, write a check, and go along like a good little resident. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Because I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to flip the whole damn game board. The next morning, I woke up early, earlier than usual. Something about the HOA's ridiculous overreach had burrowed under my skin and settled there, humming with quiet rage. I sat on my porch, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring out at the street, replaying my conversation with Gerald over and over again. The way he spoke to me, like I was some foolish child who didn't understand how visual cohesion worked, made me feel something I hadn't felt in years, defiant. This wasn't just about my porch anymore. This was a challenge. And I never backed down from a challenge. After finishing my coffee, I headed inside, opened my laptop, and began digging. I wanted to understand exactly how the HOA operated, how decisions were made, and more importantly, how this new architectural mandate had been approved. The deeper I went, the clearer it became, Gerald was the puppet master. He'd joined the HOA board less than 6 months ago and had quickly maneuvered himself into a position of authority. He was the chair of the Architectural Review Committee and had spearheaded a new, Oakbridge Visual Revitalization Initiative, which sounded fancy but really meant giving him the power to dictate how our homes looked. I found the meeting minutes from several HOA board sessions. They were buried deep on the HOA's clunky website, which clearly hadn't been updated since the Obama administration. And there, in plain black and white, were Gerald's fingerprints all over the place. He'd proposed the design changes. He'd pushed the vote through. And he'd even recommended a firm, Wexler & Stone Architecture, to handle the neighborhood redesigns. That name rang a bell. I googled Wexler & Stone and found their website. Sleek, modern, full of buzzwords like neighborhood enhancement and curated community identity. But what really caught my attention was the About Us page. There, listed as a senior partner, was none other than Gerald B. Worthington. Our HOA's own board member was a partner in the very same firm profiting off the forced porch redesigns. It wasn't just shady, it was infuriating. Gerald was pushing mandatory home renovations that funneled money straight into his own firm's pockets. He was essentially writing himself checks, using HOA authority to do it. I double-checked the state statutes, hoping what I was seeing was outright illegal. Unfortunately, it was one of those murky gray areas. Conflict of interest? Definitely. But unless he had failed to disclose it, which he hadn't, his name was right there in the meeting records. It wasn't technically against the law. Still, just because it wasn't illegal didn't mean it was going to fly with me. I called my lawyer, Vanessa, a sharp-minded woman I'd worked with for years in my construction business. She reviewed everything I found and confirmed my suspicions. "This is ethically disgusting," she said. "But unless we find something he tried to hide, it's not criminal." "I'm not trying to sue him," I told her. "I'm going to buy the whole damn firm." There was a pause on the line. Then a low chuckle. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." See, what Gerald didn't know was that I wasn't just some handyman with a nice porch. I owned 3 mid-sized construction companies across the state. We built everything from strip malls to luxury condos. I had crews, equipment, and cash flow. More importantly, I had spent over a decade learning how to spot weakness in competitors, and how to make the most of it. That day, I made some quiet calls to contacts in the local real estate and building world. Wexler and Stone wasn't as solid as they made themselves look. In fact, they were teetering on the edge of insolvency. Overextended on a failed downtown renovation project, they were bleeding money. Their two senior architects, Ben Kramer and Denise Cho, had been fielding offers from rival firms, unhappy with how Gerald was running things. Their last few residential contracts had fallen through. Gerald, it seemed, was counting on the Oakbridge HOA project to keep the firm afloat. Bad move. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked in the background, quietly assembling a shell company to handle the acquisition. I didn't want Gerald to know I was involved, not yet. I used a trusted associate to serve as my intermediary. We arranged meetings, floated the idea of a buyout, and baited the hook with promises of new capital, expanded reach, and 0 layoffs, for now. Ben and Denise were more than ready to jump ship, and when they realized I was offering them leadership roles under new ownership, they jumped on board without hesitation. They helped me gather internal documentation, financials, and personnel records. Every day, I learned a little more about how Wexler and Stone was operating, and the more I saw, the more I was convinced, Gerald didn't just need to be removed, he needed to be humiliated. It was surprisingly easy. Once I got a full look at the firm's finances, I made a calculated offer, generous enough to seem like a lifeline, but just low enough that Gerald couldn't refuse without risking a total collapse. When the papers were signed, my shell company acquired controlling interest in Wexler and Stone. Gerald still didn't know. He was in for a surprise. I scheduled a firm-wide board meeting. Officially, it was to discuss leadership restructuring and strategic direction. I made sure Gerald would attend in person. It was held in their sleek downtown office, all glass walls and polished concrete floors, the kind of place designed to look cutting-edge but soulless. I walked into the room just as the meeting was starting, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, same work boots I wear on site. Gerald looked up, confused. Then he squinted, clearly recognizing me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, already annoyed. "I'm your new boss," I said calmly. "And I've got some changes in mind." He scoffed. "This isn't funny." I slid the ownership documents across the table. It took him a moment. But when he realized what he was holding, his face turned from pale to red in a matter of seconds. He started to speak, but I raised a hand. "You used your position on the HOA to funnel business to your firm," I said. "You used your neighbors like pawns to fund your flailing business. I don't like that. So now, you're out. You can't do this." I just did. And then I fired him. Not just Gerald, every single person on the design team that had worked on the Oakbridge project. They didn't even bother to protest. Most of them probably hated working under him anyway. It was over. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The meeting room was as cold as I expected, concrete walls, sterile lighting, the faint buzz of fluorescent tubes overhead. Wexler and Stone prided themselves on minimalist elegance, but to me, it just felt empty. Impersonal. Like everything Gerald had touched. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows for a moment, looking down at the city traffic crawling below. Then I turned and faced the people sitting around the long glass conference table. There were 8 of them. Gerald sat dead center, like a king on a crumbling throne, completely unaware of what was about to happen. He was dressed in his usual tan blazer with an open collar and one of those obnoxious silk pocket squares no one actually needs. He gave me a once-over and sneered. "Can we help you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, laying a folder on the table. "I believe this meeting was called to discuss the firm's future. I figured I should be here, since I own it now." For a moment, nobody said anything. Gerald stared at me like I'd just spoken in another language. His lips moved but no words came out. Then he laughed, a short, confused bark that reeked of disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about?" he said, standing. "This is a private board meeting. Who let you in here?" Ben and Denise, the two senior architects who had helped make the acquisition happen, remained silent. They didn't even look at him. They already knew the play. They were waiting for me to make it official. I took a deep breath, opened the folder, and pulled out the papers. My name is Thomas Langston. Over the past 3 weeks, my holding company acquired controlling interest in Wexler and Stone through a series of private transactions. As of this morning, I am the majority shareholder, and legally authorized to make executive personnel changes, including yours, Gerald. Now the room came alive. A few people gasped. One woman leaned back in her chair and whispered something under her breath. Gerald looked from face to face, desperate for backup, but no one jumped to his defense. He reached for the documents with trembling hands, eyes scanning each line. You could see the moment it hit him, this wasn't a bluff. It was real. This is, he stammered. This is outrageous. No, I said, calm but firm. What's outrageous is what you've been doing to people in my neighborhood. You used your position on the HOA board to award contracts to your own firm. You pushed through design mandates that had no support. You fined your neighbors, some of them elderly, for not conforming to your aesthetic. You abused your power. I disclosed my affiliation with the firm, he said quickly, as if that might save him. Everything was above board. You disclosed it, sure, I said, pacing slowly. But you still manipulated the entire process. You leveraged your position to save your failing company. And you thought no one would do anything about it. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. Effective immediately, your employment at Wexler and Stone is terminated. Your access to firm resources has been revoked. Security will escort you from the building. That's when he really lost it. You can't fire me. I built this firm. You think you can just walk in here and take it from me? I didn't take it, I said. I bought it. Fair and legal. And I'm doing everyone here a favor by cutting out the rot. Gerald lunged for his laptop bag, muttering something about legal retaliation and lawsuits, but security had already entered the room. 2 guards, calm and professional, stepped forward and stood behind him. For a second, I saw panic in his eyes. Not anger. Not indignation. Panic, because he realized this wasn't just a setback. It was the end. Everything he'd built, everything he thought he controlled, was gone in the span of 10 minutes. He tried to shout something on the way out, but no one was listening. As the doors closed behind him, the tension in the room seemed to break like a snapped rubber band. I turned to the remaining staff and spoke with clarity. This firm is not dead, I said. It was sick. And it's going to take some time to clean it up. But the days of backroom deals and neighborhood exploitation are over. From this point forward, we're going to be transparent, ethical, and useful. Especially to the communities we claim to serve. I saw heads nodding around the room. Ben gave me a small smile. Denise just looked relieved. I let them all go early that day and scheduled one-on-one meetings for the following week to talk about where they fit into the new company. That evening, I sat on the edge of my porch, with a bottle of cold beer in one hand and my phone in the other. I typed up a public statement and posted it on the Oakbridge HOA community board, as well as on the neighborhood Facebook group. It read: effective immediately, all architectural redesign mandates pushed by the Oakbridge HOA through Wexler and Stone are voided. There will be no required changes to porches, paint colors, or property aesthetics unless related to safety codes or legal compliance. Residents are encouraged to maintain their homes with pride, personality, and freedom. If you've received a fine, contact the HOA's legal department, it will be reversed. Welcome back to your neighborhood. Asterisk. Within minutes, the post exploded. I received over 100 comments in the first hour. People who had felt powerless finally had a voice. Some residents told me their stories, how they were fined for planting native grasses instead of uniform turf, or how Gerald made them repaint their doors 3 times. One woman posted a picture of her front garden lit up with fairy lights and wrote, asterisk, finally, I can make my home mine again. Asterisk. I didn't respond to every comment, but I read them all. And each one made the months of work, the legal headaches, and the millions I spent feel absolutely worth it. The next morning, I walked through the neighborhood for the first time in weeks without dread. People waved. A man honked his horn and gave me a thumbs up. Kids rode scooters down the sidewalk without their parents nervously glancing at porch colors. It wasn't just my porch anymore. It was a symbol of something bigger. The tyrant was gone. His game was over. And I wasn't just the guy who fought back. I was the guy who fired the architect of the oppression, bought the whole building he worked in, and opened the doors to something real. Freedom. In wood and stone. In light and laughter. On every porch in Oakbridge. The days that followed Gerald's firing felt like the first breaths after coming up from underwater. You don't realize how much pressure you've been carrying until it's gone. The neighborhood, once stiff and cautious under the watchful eyes of the HOA, felt alive again. Kids laughed a little louder. People started sitting on their front steps, sipping coffee or lemonade, waving without that awkward hesitation that had crept in ever since Gerald began his visual harmony crusade. It was like a gray filter had been lifted off the entire street. But the HOA didn't vanish overnight. They weren't done trying to cover their tracks. 2 days after I posted the public statement nullifying the porch redesign mandates, I received a letter, delivered by courier this time. Classy touch. It was from the HOA's legal representative, claiming that I had no authority to override board-approved architectural plans and that my public statements were inciting confusion and discontent among residents. They even had the nerve to demand a retraction and warned that I could face a civil defamation suit if I continued to interfere with community governance. I read the letter once, twice, then laughed out loud. They were scrambling. So I did the logical thing, I forwarded the letter to Vanessa, my lawyer. She called me within the hour, already laughing. They're threatening you with defamation, she said. That's adorable. She drafted a response, calm, polite, legally bulletproof, and I posted that one too. I made it public on the community forum with her permission. To the Oakbridge HOA, as majority owner of the firm responsible for the now invalidated architectural redesign plans, I am fully within my rights to cease all contracted work related to those plans. Furthermore, I have shared publicly available information and first-hand accounts of actions taken by members of the HOA board, which I welcome scrutiny upon. I advise you to focus less on silencing your neighbors and more on cleaning up the mess you made. Asterisk. The effect was immediate. 3 board members resigned by the end of that week, including the HOA president. Apparently, they didn't like having the spotlight turned back on them. Especially when that spotlight came with questions from angry residents and a local journalist who picked up the story and wrote a piece titled Asterisk, Porch Rebellion, when one man took on his HOA, and won. Asterisk. I became something of a reluctant celebrity in the area. Strangers stopped me in the grocery store to shake my hand. A woman at the hardware store offered to name her next cat after me. I didn't need the praise, I hadn't done it for that, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to see people unafraid again. But I wasn't done. Once the firm was mine and Gerald was out, I rebranded it. The name, Wexler & Stone, had a bitter taste to it, like cheap wine served in a fancy bottle. I wanted something that felt like a fresh start. Something personal. So I called it Porch and Timber. It started as a joke, just me and Denise brainstorming over a whiteboard, but the name stuck. Simple. Grounded. Honest. I brought Ben and Denise in as co-leads and told them my vision. We were going to offer affordable, personalized architectural services to homeowners who wanted something unique, not something dictated by committee. And just to drive the point home, we launched a campaign for our own neighborhood. Free consultations. No strings attached. If you'd ever been fined, warned, or shamed by the HOA for how your home looked, we were offering a free redesign plan, one that celebrated individuality. The response was overwhelming. One woman had hidden a beautiful mural behind hedges for years, too afraid of getting cited. We helped her restore it and even installed soft lighting so it could be admired at night. A retired couple had ripped out their porch swing after getting fined for visual clutter. We built them a brand new one, better than before, and threw a ribbon-cutting cookout in their yard. Even the HOA office, what was left of it, had to adapt. With 3 board members gone and a new president installed, things got quiet. The new leadership quickly announced a moratorium on architectural enforcement until a full community review could be held. Translation: they were licking their wounds. But the best part? The residents finally realized the power they had all along. See, Gerald's greatest trick wasn't his design mandate, it was convincing everyone they had no choice. That the HOA was some all-powerful entity instead of a group of neighbors with too much time and too little pushback. Once that illusion cracked, everything changed. People started attending meetings. They asked questions. They demanded transparency. One guy even ran for the board specifically so he could make sure nobody ever messes with a man's porch again. He won by a landslide. As for Gerald, word spread that he tried starting a boutique design consultancy in another city. But his name had become toxic. No one wanted to hire the guy who got outmaneuvered by a construction worker and publicly humiliated in his own firm's office. Last I heard, he was teaching part-time at a community college, which, honestly, felt like a fitting ending. Let him lecture about aesthetics to bored freshmen. He'd lost the game, and the board. Sometimes I still get up early and sit out on my porch, just like I did that morning the notice first appeared. Only now, there's no anxiety. No ugly HOA letter taped to the door. Just the quiet creak of the swing, the warm scent of cedar in the air, and the distant sounds of a neighborhood that feels like home again. The porch still looks exactly how I built it, wood grain, warm stain, black iron railings. No beige paint. No faux tiles. No harmonious redesign. Just me. And every time I sit here, I smile. Because I didn't just save my porch, I saved the spirit of the neighborhood. And I did it the way we all wish we could, by flipping the script, rewriting the rules, and reminding everyone that when you build something with your own hands, no one, has the right to tear it down. Not without a fight. And certainly not when the guy you're messing with is willing to buy your whole damn firm just to fire you.